Okay, so this is the audio for The More You Subtract, the More You Add. Cutting Girls Down to Size by Jean Kilborn. Another wonderful article that I'm forcing you to read. Okay, so first she talks about this idea of adolescents as new consumers. So obviously adolescents aren't, quite as developed as adults. They don't have, adult sensibilities, especially in regards to the messages that they receive through advertising. So, they can be more susceptible consumers in a lot of ways. So she argues that they're especially susceptible to advertising's messages, those meta messages of how we should look, how we should act, how we should be, that are latent in these images. Adolescents are particularly sensitive to peer pressure, and so it's with knowledge of this, that advertisers take advantage of young people's anxieties. So, they market these anxieties into, products that they can sell them in order to, make up for these perceived, you know, um, inadequacies that are really, again, being reinforced through this advertising system. So girls experience this series of losses in adolescence. She argues that first, girls lose self-confidence. Before adolescence, girls tend to be much more confident, much happier, report less stress, less kind of psychological issues. Once girls hit adolescence, this overwhelming message coming from the media of, you know, the need for women to be a sexual object, the need to be sexy, the need to be, to kind of self objectify yourself in order to, fit the norms of society becomes very oppressive for young women. So not only do they lose self confidence, a lot of them lose ambition. They learn that women are basically reduced to, their physical stature, what they look like. So, this is something that misrepresentation talked about a little bit, how this relates to people's political aspirations. Obviously, if you don't feel comfortable in your own skin and you're kind of, spurned on by a media system that perpetuates that, that's obviously not going to translate into much ambition in other ways, in other fields. And she also argues that, girls have this loss of voice or their unique personality, that they're kind of wacky and fun when they're young. And then once they hit adolescence, the peer pressure of being, kind of conforming to these norms takes over. Kilborn goes on to argue that no matter how good your background, no matter how you were raised, you grow up in a toxic cultural environment. So she argues that because girls come in contact with these images, no matter where they're placed in society, it puts them at extreme risk for self-mutilation, eating disorders, which, over 60% of women have eating disorders, more than half of women, and addictions. And so, there's a quote I wanted to read. The culture, both reflected and reinforced by advertising, urges girls to adopt a false sense of self, to bury alive their real selves, to become feminine, which means to be nice and kind and sweet, to compete with other girls for the attention of boys, and to value romantic relationships with boys above all else. This is kind of like what we were talking about in the last slide, about the kind of losses that girls hit at adolescence. This is very socially constructed for women. We're taught that we're competitive. We're taught that all we should care about is a romantic relationship. And this sense of feminine is really coming through these media sources, very dictated by what your sexual appearance would be. So, for a lot of girls, they're encountering this double bind, and for adolescents, this can be very difficult. So, the media is telling you on one hand that you should be, overtly sexual, that you should have, you should be somewhat sexually developed, right? But at the same time, it's saying that your presentation should be virginal, that you should somehow give off this air that you are not you know, open for business, for lack of a better term. So it becomes this very confusing place for girls. And this is, of course, another issue in a rape culture, which we'll talk about in a bit. But it is this double bind that girls experience that's really puts them at all of these risks because of the construction from the media. She goes on to talk about how this toxic cultural environment is not something that is exclusively waged against girls. This is something that obviously affects boys as well as girls. So advertising is really an attack on self-esteem. Literally, they're telling you there's something wrong with you. You need to buy this to augment you in some way. So men, they play off of men's desires for women, for power, for whatever in, the construction of beer advertisements. There's, this kind of very clear message that, there's something wrong and that you're lacking something. And so it's that desire that, oh, I want to be that person. If I buy that product, I can be that person, right? So it's really just the whole construction is just to be an attack on your self-esteem, to, convince you that you need something. So advertisers send the message to young girls that all that matters is their beauty. So, clearly, as you can see through some of the ads so far, and some of the ads that I'll be showing you in the next couple slides, young women especially, are getting that message that their body is what matters, not their mind, not their accomplishments, but their physical form. So they get this message, though, through these advertisements, that with self-sacrifice, that ideal is achievable, that you can be that perfect figure that is so rare statistically as a natural body type. So, it leads to this objectification and commodification of women's bodies. So, girls not only are being objectified by their male peers, by even their female peers, but they learn to self-objectify themselves. And we kind of see this commodification of women's bodies where we, turn each part of them into, now you need to buy something to support that, right? So this is just kind of an issue of being, especially an adult woman. It's a lot of upkeep, right? You have to buy a lot of stuff. Women spend a lot of money on these products. So it's not enough to have, something for your skin. You have to have makeup. You then have to have hair products. You have to have nails. You have to have et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So women become this image, and we put in a lot of financial resources to kind of commodify our own bodies. So, a lot of this has to do with being thin. And so for a lot of people, that commodification can be diet pills or some sort of other dangerous behaviors to try to crash diet to be that ideal body type that they see portrayed over and over as ideal in the media. So this could be really hard for adolescent girls as, when you're an adolescent, sometimes you go through growth spurts and sometimes you have these, normal fluctuations in your weight because you basically gain a little before you grow a little. So, this can be really hard for them as they're trying to come of age and they really think that their identity is so important that they're attractive to their identity, and that attractive means thin, so that, any fluctuation in weight could be a big attack on someone's self-esteem, or they could, experience, kind of problems from their peers. So, this makes girls very at risk for, problems like eating disorders. Worrying about weight. So this is something that pretty much most women in American society can pretty much instantly relate to. This being obsessed with one's weight is considered normal in advertisements. It's constructed as, something that women just do. that they're constantly challenging their own body, which is in reality true. It's kind of that life imitating art kind of situation, except for advertisements really aren't art. But what she argues is that this obsession with thinness is not just about being thin, or it's not really a health thing. Like, clearly, the kind of image that we're portraying, like in the bottom right hand corner advertisement, is not necessarily a healthy woman, right? What this obsession with thinness, she argues, is most deeply about cutting girls and women down to size. So she argues that it's really about restricting a woman's size. So restricting her power in a way. So she says it's only a symbol, albeit a powerful and destructive one, of tremendous fear of female power. So, noting that thinness as an ideal has always happened during times of increased freedom for women. So it kind of becomes a backlash against, women expanding their rights, becomes this obsession with the body, with regulating the body. How can you worry about your political efficacy? How can you worry about your career ambitions? How can you worry about any of those things if you're constantly worrying about your weight? Right? The kind of time and attention women put into this, the kind of scrutiny and self-harm it causes psychologically. The advertisements, not only do they construct it as normative, but they have stuff that's just so misleading, like the advertisement here on the slide that says, it's Kim Kardashian, as if she wears shape-ups and that's what did it, right? And not like plastic surgery and those kind of things. It says, just look at what shape-ups can do, as if that came from the shoes. So, it constructs this reality for especially young women that aren't as critical of the media sources that they use, that if you just buy this product, you can be this ideal thing, and that somehow, your weight, controlling your weight is really the most important thing of your life, that somehow if that clicks into place, everything else will click into place. So it becomes this obsession for a lot of young women. But really it has everything to do with, cutting them down to size. So on one hand, you have the message from the media saying to physically, worry about your weight, get rid of your, really control your size. And at the same time, it's also telling women that their voice is not as important as their body. So, in the same way as, Victorian era costumes sewed women's arms into their sides so they wouldn't take up much space, there was a cultural value to women taking up less space, to, being passive and not, inhabiting the same kind of sphere as men. And so the more and more women push out of that, a lot of people argue, not just Kilborn, but, other scholars that look specifically at the image of women in society, like Naomi Wolf in The Beauty Myth, you know, um, they really look at how our society is constructing these really harmful images, that women aren't important for what they say, they're important for how they look. And so, girls are discouraged from taking up space, from being vocal. Like all of these advertisements here at the bottom, you know, they basically encourage, using some sort of commodified item to speak for you. Usually your shoes, your watch, your ring, your mascara. So, this is a problem not just for the girls that get these messages, but for the fact that they're not the only ones that consume these ads. Their peers, their parents, their teachers, everyone in society consumes these things, and we all start to develop a value system around this, that it's normative and natural, and girls, soak that in. She then talks about how gender is displayed in advertisement. So, clearly advertisers spend a lot of money on psychological research and focus groups. They know what they're looking at. They are trying to manipulate a need. They're trying to make you feel inadequate. So typically this is done through kind of this gendered system. It's such a organizing principle that, when challenged, it can upset people. If it leaves them with a need, then, maybe they'll buy that product. So female poses and ads are typically passive, limp, doll-like, and often infantilized, which is just gross. But, obviously reflecting a more traditional gender norm of the past, of this kind of sexual division that women were submissive. And so women are often displayed as subservient in advertisements. Children in advertisements are constructed very differently. What they do, what they're allowed to do, how they're posed, all of it is very gendered. You can see it even in those ads. And you can see it in the way that females and males interact with the products that they're placing, how they touch things. So women typically lightly or, they don't grasp, they don't really have power, is really the construction of the image. That, they're basically blank. They're just like a doll-like figure without, any sort of substance. That they are just image. They are fragile. And this is something that you see over and over and over and over represented again and again in all these advertisements in very mainstream men's and women's magazines. So she brings up this virgin whore dichotomy, something we've been talking about a lot in this class. So this idea that girls are given a contradictory message through advertisements, that they should be sexually pure but not innocent. Somehow they have to be virginal and experience at the same time, kind of personified in the moods of lip gloss you can buy, virgin or slut. This dichotomy is something that is old, obviously, but it's something that is reinforced in this new generation through this mass media, through advertising. This argument that women have to be both, something that's basically impossible. The only time that women are shown having any sort of sexual power instead of being passive is when eating. Eating is reduced to a sexual act in advertising, which is even more confusing for, the public that's watching someone that's emaciated have a love affair with a cheeseburger, which is bizarre message for girls that are dealing with eating disorders, that get this message that you can eat whatever, but you have to remain, ridiculously thin to this very narrow ideal. So obviously a contradictory message for girls, as well as this dichotomy. So, it's not a new thing, but it's something that through advertising, it's, kind of manifested differently. So Jean talks about one of the risks of these sexual messages in advertising is the pressure that it puts on children, right? They're exposed to hundreds of advertisements, even, in their school age years. And there's a lot of sexual information and misinformation, especially hierarchically gendered and raced representations that, provide a very skewed misinformation, of what sexuality is, of how it works, of, women even having a subjectivity and not just, being an object for male desire. So, you can see the relationship between these messages that normalize, this kind of ideology that leads to predation, that leads to, sexual assaults and rapes. And so you see this culture that starts to normalize the sexuality of younger and younger and younger girls. You see this prevalence in rape and sexual assault against young girls, going alongside that. You see a rise in STDs as younger and younger kids start having sex, but not really understanding what that means. Just seeing this kind of idealized representation over and over and wanting that thing that they're being constructed to desire, to want. So advertising kind of becomes a source of sex education. I mean, if you look at the bottom one here on the left, like, what is that supposed to be? Like, take a guess, right? And it's a milk advertisement. Like, milk. I mean, the same thing that was those got milk mustaches. Clearly, as more and more, like, advertisements become more and more pornographic and that becomes more and more mainstream, they're always trying to vie for attention, right? So clearly that gets your attention. But what kind of attention does it get and what kind of message does it send? And those are those things that really I don't think advertisers are worrying about. They're just trying to give a shock appeal enough to get their advertisement seen. So you see a lot of these, like the one in the middle here where he's, having sex with a car that's, like a magazine photo of a car. The kind of horrible representation of this rum, turning a woman of color into an animal, which is very often done in a lot of advertisements. You have a couple advertisements here that really sexualize young girls, like girls under 10 years old. You have this Sky vodka, which, they're known for basically their whole range of advertisements being very much like this, that, they're trying to stylize and make, visually appealing what is, in effect, a very striking message. Like, how do you read that as a cultural text? If you're a young girl, what do you take of that? Right? And so these advertisements, they have an effect culturally on especially young people as they're exposed to more and more of these things at a very young age before they develop any sort of critical media literacy. The sexual messages in advertising are deplorable and disgusting and ridiculous and over the top. But what bothers me more, as if there can be something worse, there literally is, it's the fact that violence against women is often used in ads, again, in that shock value way to try and get more attention to a product. This is very troubling because, clearly this is coming about in a culture where there's a prevalence of violence against women. You know, the fact that in all of these advertisements, women lack any sort of sexual agency. They are not willing participants. They are being forced or hurt in some way. That's a very clear, striking image. That picture tells it, says 1,000 words kind of thing. There's a very clear rape culture ideology in these advertisements, right? She's literally an object. So you see there's two advertisements here at the bottom that basically, construct an ad for jeans and, ads for jeans as gang rape. So, clearly women are staged as a sexual object for male consumption, shown in very degrading poses as helpless victims to male sexual violence. You have this Duncan Quinn advertisement advertising a tie where it appears to be a dead woman in her undergarments being dragged, like hung across a car's hood. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You have P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, whatever he's going by now, what looks a lot like sexual assault in this advertisement. Again, not giving a woman sexual agency. It doesn't read as if she's enjoying the situation. And clearly this advertisement for shoes stepping on this woman's throat. She's only there as a body prop, but again, the image that is sent through that is what? How do you read that? If you're especially a young person, how do you read that image as a cultural script itself? So, this is an issue, obviously, that's a problem in these constructions of advertisements because of the kind of images that they're sending. You have the Jimmy Choo shoes, they're known for a lot of those advertisements on the right-hand side over here that, just dead women posed in trunks that he's burying, or the Marc Jacobs ad at the top. Using women's dead bodies as props when this is, clearly there's, still issues in the society of women being raped and murdered. So I think, it unfortunately kind of reflects that cultural problem and instead almost provides a fuel or justification for it. People that view a lot of these advertisements have much more rape myth ideology of, that women are asking for it, that the roles of men and women are very hierarchical that, they tend to agree with these kind of things. And that is a problem. So, the way that these advertisements construct women is very important.